Next, we have the cons for this particular option. An ineffective teacher might have tenure in the school, and the rapport and relationship between the teacher and Miss Stevens will be contentious for a very long time. The principal might be seen as indecisive and easily influenced, and a slew of student discipline problems can occur with a teacher like that with poor classroom management. Option number 4 is pros and cons. The principal might have another chance to evaluate Mrs. Stevens. Mrs. Stevens could look at it as an opportunity to grow professionally and take it seriously. Some of the cons: this could be in a very clear violation of her teacher contract and the negotiated agreement for the school district, and it could keep a possibly ineffective teacher in the same position for another year, and the same evaluation form is still used. And the pros and cons for number 5. Now, this one is the most brash decision. The situation is handled immediately. That's the only pro. The cons are a lot. Finding a long-term substitute could be difficult. Making plans for that substitute is hard. Mrs. Stevens could definitely have a case in court for this kind of action, and it shows bad practice and methods by the principal. The selection of the best option is definitely number 2, in my opinion. Revamping the evaluation form will help the teachers and the principal in that school for years to come. That evaluation form, in all honesty, should be thrown out. It was vague, short, and ineffective. The fact that she was not evaluated outside of formal observations is atrocious. This cannot happen. The principal needs more resources. Not renewing her contract might be necessary, but the principal has not gathered enough information to know that decision. There needs to be walkthroughs, peer observations, collaboration with her supervisor, or student surveys, and all of them can happen. Judging by the conversation had by the principal and Mrs. Stevens, there hasn't been a foundational rapport or relationship built to begin with. It seemed like he was not very in tune with her, and she was not very in tune with him. There was not a clear level of communication as seen in the case study. This option, while it has the chance to be dismissed by the superintendent, is the best for gathering information and data on Mrs. Stevens. The superintendent will hopefully be receptive to extending that deadline. They still have till the third Friday in May if this is taking place in Kansas. This gives the freedom for the principal to either hire her back for the next year or dismiss her this year. Also, finding a solid teacher candidate later in the year can be difficult, but it might be necessary in this situation. There's a lot of great teachers who I know who were hired later in the year. As we all know, it's nice to hire them early, but also sometimes things change and you get great teachers no matter what time of the year you hire them. Lastly, this helps all parties. Mrs. Stevens is able to receive helpful, effective strategies and prove herself to the principal. She says she's a better teacher than that. And the principal is able to make an informed decision. And also the rest of the staff might see this as an opportunity for the evaluation process to improve. It will show that this strong leadership by the principal and that he is able to see that he has insufficient data and needs more time. I think each teacher in that building would respect that decision. The implementation of the decision, these are the steps that we're going to go through. First, you need to talk to the superintendent, of course, to get that deadline extended. I would ask for 2 to 3 weeks. 3 is preferable, but I think the superintendent would for sure give the principal 2. Lastly, the principal will state the rest of these action steps to the superintendent so they know exactly how this is going to improve the process. And also, I think the principal could show that he didn't have enough information, which is ultimately on him, but at least he's aware of that, and making that decision will ultimately benefit his school and one of the schools in the superintendent's domain. Number 2, provide helpful strategies to Mrs. Stevens so that she can utilize in her classroom. This involves student management strategies and also student involvement strategies. 3, perform walkthroughs and informal observations frequently in this 2 to 3 week period. and be transparent with Mrs. Stevens about this process. Say, I am gathering more data. You said that I am not getting the full picture. I am trying to find that. Is she improving? Is she using the strategies? Is she improving her classroom management? Reach out to Mrs. Stevens' supervisor. Tell them that you are looking at this decision and gathering more data to make an informed decision. They might be able to offer any more insight and also helpful information and data. Schedule peer observations for that teacher, and this should be done very well by the principal, and make sure that the teachers don't know what's going on. Say you're trying something new, and they will like that. I think this is a great way for them to improve their teaching, and also for Mrs. Stevens to have not so much pressure on her in that environment. These observations should focus on Mrs. Stevens' strengths and weaknesses, but this doesn't have to, the principal does not have to say that. He could say, we're looking at classroom management and student involvement, and that's what they could look for in that observation. They don't have to know that's her weakness. Lastly, he should utilize this data in his final decision. Hopefully there will be 2 to 3 teachers performing these observations. Also, one of them should be the department head, or at least in the department. Same department as Ms. Stevens. Number 6, provide student surveys for each of Mrs. Stevens' pupils to complete. Does she have a good rapport or relationship with the students? Do they feel like they're learning at their maximum potential? That might have been an off day that the principal was in there. You never know. They could be engaging with her in that way and learning a lot. He has not looked at student data or student surveys in this time. This data will be helpful for the final decision. 7, research new forms for evaluations. The old one was ineffective, vague, and quite frankly short. Personality should not be on an evaluation form, in my opinion. I think there's a lot more to teaching than that form has to offer. And looking at it, Mrs. Stevens deserves more. Whether she's renewed or not, there needs to be more information gathered. The principal should also take into consideration what he's doing for the collection of Mrs. Stevens' data and information. These methods could be used in future evaluations. This is how he should be evaluating teachers all the time. There needs to be multiple resources used by that principal. Number 9, after the 2 to 3 week period, the principal should analyze all the data. Does it differ from his original evaluation/opinion? Has he seen Mrs. Stevens make improvement with student involvement in classroom management? Has there been progress? Has she taken this seriously? Is she actively striving to make improvements with her teaching? Number 10, the principal should be able to make a final decision with the information and data gathered. If she has shown enough improvement and the information gathered from her other resources, the peer observations, the student surveys, the supervisor collaboration, principal should be able to renew Mrs. Stevens' contract, hopefully with the plan of her still progressing in the future. If she has not shown enough improvement and the information gathered does not differ from his original evaluation, she should not be renewed. But now he has the correct information to back that decision up. Possible outcomes and management of those consequences from the outcomes. One possible outcome for this is that Mrs. Stevens' contract will be renewed, but she will hopefully have better support and more buy-in to professional growth. Consequence of this action, though, she might still be a below average teacher for the rest of her career and have tenure in that building. The principal will need to do his best to be transparent with Mrs. Stevens and work on her growth and improvement throughout the years. Another outcome will be Mrs. Stevens' contract is not renewed. Since the principal has gathered enough information, there's not a really heavy consequence for this. She might be angry, but at least she knows that he went through the proper steps and looked at all of the resources and information to make that decision. And the principal's evaluation methods will be seen as inferior to the superintendent. Now, this is a big one. Asking for a deadline is usually a big no-no in my opinion, but I think him being honest is helpful in this situation. He will hopefully be seen as an individual making steps towards his own professional growth in his evaluation methods. And, I think that honesty and integrity will go a long way in the superintendent's eyes. He shouldn't do it all the time, but this is necessary in this case, and I think the superintendent would appreciate that. So who needs to know about the implementation of this decision? Mrs. Stevens for sure needs to know that more data is being gathered, and that way she can effectively utilize the strategies for improvement within the classroom. The superintendent, of course, needs to know to give that extension for the deadline. And Mrs. Stevens' supervisor needs to know that more information is being gathered, and they can even help the principal make this decision. And can the principal handle this alone? Overall, with this option that we chose, he is not able to handle this alone. He needs to gather more information using different resources, and some of those resources are actual people, students, peers, supervisors. So he needs to look at this and use everything he's got to make this decision. It is not a light one. The non-renewal of a teacher is a big decision, and he needs all the help he can get. So, informing of logical consequences. Now, this is very clear that this is a warning, not a threat. The principal at the beginning of this process needs to be very transparent with Mrs. Stevens. She is heard, and he is getting more information to make a well-informed decision. He heard her, pleas for wanting to be renewed for the next year and that she's a better teacher. Hopefully this opens up a positive line of communication between them. Now, I know that's a long shot, but in all honesty, that's one thing that will be definitely very helpful for Mrs. Stevens. He will also need to really tell her if she doesn't improve the areas, and if what he sees from this is what he saw at the beginning, she will be non-renewed. He's just gathering more data to make an informed decision. And it's not she's on the hot seat. It's just he needs more time, he needs more data, and he wants to let her prove herself. Plan B. This is, of course, if this fails, this plan should work for gathering more data. I'm confident in it, and I've looked at other options. But that said, the principal could disapprove of the deadline extension. The principal, if this happens, the principal really needs to speak with the department head and Mrs. Stevens' supervisor. They might have more insight to make this decision a quick one. Ultimately, plan B would be to not renew her unless they said something very contrary. The justification for this decision. Promoting the academic success and personal well-being of each student and adult. My decision helped promote academic success for the students by evaluating a teacher who is deemed as ineffective before. Gathering more information and making that well-informed decision benefits every single student, whether Mrs. Stevens stays or not. And also utilizing a student survey and giving them buy-in to their own education, and just making student surveys a normal thing in that school would be very helpful for them. Also, the well-being of Mrs. Stevens and the principal were addressed. This not only improves the principal's evaluation methods, but it also improves Mrs. Stevens' areas of need. And these are student involvement and classroom management, of course. Does this provide clear evidence that pre-K through 12 students are being better prepared for college, careers, and life? Ultimately, this is improvement for both parties of the principal and the teacher, and this has been shown that these are the largest school-based impact on student learning. So that said, if we are improving the principal and the student, then this ultimately is better preparing each student for college careers and life in general after high school.